All right, thanks, John. So I'm Abhi. I am a principal data scientist at Sage. I think a better title will be principal data janitor of digital health. I've been dabbling into digital health data for the last 5 years. I'm also 3 months shy of finishing my graduate degree at University of Washington in the last 4 years or so that has been quite an experience. Today I'm going to be talking about retention broadly in digital health, and what that means is this is take-home message, I guess, as you are app developers and you are designing and deploying things in the wild. What's going on before and what's going on after? After all, the goal is to infer something from those, if I can call that data collection, that's a loaded word. Let's start with the infamous curve. Hopefully everyone has seen this or some sort of curve in digital health. That's the hockey stick curve of people coming and leaving. There are some studies that show it, others shy away from showing it, and the broad numbers are between 5 and 15%, maybe 20%, give or take. And these are fully remote virtual studies. I'm not talking about the blended version of it, and that can have many more differences in there. What we don't know in these is what's going on in the sub-patterns. Are people leaving at the same uniform rate? Is it random, or is there any differential engagement patterns on people who leave early, some people who leave late? That will lead to bias in data collection, and I highly recommend, I'm sorry that citation is pretty small here, but it's a very old, well, relatively old 2014 paper from Chambers. It's an amazing read on what big data can and mostly cannot tell you. 10,000 people sample with 50% attrition is a bias. So that needs to be kept in the context. This problem is actually not that old. The goal is not for you to read the lines here, but in early 2000s, people have been talking about the law of attrition in e-health, and e-health is not different from digital health in the present day context. And there have been debates at that point in terms of the science of attrition and better understanding that, and it's not similar to traditional brick and mortar trial. So, however, we have not really made progress since then. So that's what I'm aiming to do with some of the data we have collected, is to understand how people engage, disengage, abandon, lapse, what are the lapses in the fully remote digital health studies. And to that effect, the data that I'll be presenting, sorry, not going into all the details here, roughly we have about 100,000 participants with close to 800,000 days worth of participant data, with about more than 3 million active tasks completed by these people across 8 to 10 different studies in the last 5 years or so. This is important. You are getting you're basically seeing this for the first time. This has not been peer reviewed. So if your eyes roll over what I'm talking about, we have lunch to argue over. One basic question is how long people actually remain active in the studies. And I'm going to ask, what does that even mean? What is the definition of active? And literature is gray on this. So if you are joining a 30-day study or whatever number of days, right, duration can be counted from your first day in the study to the last day in the study, and you could be just participating on those 2 days, or the actual number of days that you did something in the study. And these will give completely different outcomes in terms of engagement, compliance, adherence. So when you look at some of the pharma studies, not to name anything more on that, one needs to go into those details. So I'm going to be focusing on basically time to event analysis for the geekiness in the crowd, but this is basically standard survival analysis. I'm going to be mostly eluting the take-home messages without going into the stats of these. I'm happy to answer them offline or during the break. So these are 8 or 9 curves from different studies, and the take-home message is this: 50% of the cohort is gone within the first 7 days. The higher curve that you see is one of the studies that actually paid people money or incentives over time, and they were paid in chunks. And that's one of those studies actually I was fortunate enough to be involved in over time. And so we're going to sort of disentangle some of this in the next couple of minutes and see what's going on. Also, if you look at the sub-cohorts of people who have stayed in the study for X number of days, let's say from 1 to 16, you see this lift, and so that's basically, if people stay in the study for a week, the median survival or retention of the cohort actually increases by more than 3 weeks. So maybe there could be a flexible withdrawal design or run-in period that could be introduced where you can enrich your cohort. I'm not saying that will take away the bias, but at least there is a way to see where you can sort of enrich the people who are more active in the studies. Older people are actually staying the longest in these studies. What does that mean, right? Young people are the most represented in a sample, but they leave the study far more earlier. We do not see any difference in gender. And by the way, I'm sorry I did not introduce the X and Y axis here. The X axis is the day in the study for the first 12 weeks, 3 months. And the Y axis is the survival probability or percentage of the cohort that remained active in the study. People with a clinical condition of interest to the study, so if I'm an asthma study and I'm recruiting people with asthma, they are active in the study for significantly longer than in the controls. This has ramifications. So if you're doing a case control observation analyses, you better have some strategy to enrich for controls. You probably will not be able to do much later otherwise. This is also fascinating. There are a couple of studies in this sample data where people were referred to the digital study by a clinician. And there the retention is an order of magnitude difference. So from less than 2 weeks to about 40 days in the study, and that's pretty encouraging. It could be also that it is indicating towards a blend of using the clinicians and the digital health researchers together. It also chimes very nicely with the recent Pew research that a majority of the Americans trust their doctors. Again, that's a loaded one, but a partnership there could be meaningful. We can also look at long-term app usage behavior, and what does that mean? So if we look at a person's response over time, so the blue boxes are the day in which they did something in the app, and stack them over. And this is just for representation. I'm actually stacked about 3 million tasks here. You can start to see clusters of people, and those clusters actually have semantic as well as demographic meaning in them. Not showing all the gory details here, but we found 4 clusters, so that's our x-axis here, C1 to C4. And you can see there's distinct differences, of course, in the participation that we were clustering against. So people in the altruistic or C1 cluster are the most active, but what the screen doesn't show is we have less than 1 in 10 people or person in that cluster. There's also enrichment for certain demographics, so older people are more represented or enriched, I guess, in the C1, C2, the higher engagement clusters. And then the minorities are actually least longitudinally engaged. So they can come in, but they will not engage continually, and they are more represented in the C3, C4 cluster. That's the sporadically engaged people. Moving on to enrollment, and that's for the star because we are not really accounting for any study-specific recruitment strategies, which could have some biases. But nevertheless, it's a good idea to look at, in the last 5 years, who have been recruited and from where are they coming, regardless of the bias that might be present, and that should be acknowledged. Digital divide continues. The red is the U.S. Census proportion of the population by race and ethnicity, and the black is the sample that we have with the error bars is the 1 standard deviation. And you can see there's significant difference in African American, blacks, and Hispanic Latinos. More needs to be done there, of course. This is intentionally on 2 color tones. This is showing where we are recruiting people from, and the blue or the purple is the higher recruitment states with higher than average recruitment, and the orange one is the opposite of it. I'm not meaning to say any causation here, neither even correlation. I'm shying away from that. But if you look at this, this does represent a lot of things in the country. There are several offshoots that could be done from this, which I'm not showing on the screen. So just to quickly wrap it up, before you build the next digital study, there are two key things that I suppose we should keep in mind: retention and enrollment, and not super hard things to do, but something to be aware of. And there are examples in which our paper or hopefully will show on how to go about the initial problem of, yes, there is a 50% attrition in the week one, but I'm going to also argue and say the 50% attrition in the digital health compared to a traditional brick and mortar clinical trial is very different. It takes a few seconds to sign up for a digital health study versus going to a physical clinic, signing up, and that itself enriches the cohort for a much higher motivation. So maybe 50% is actually not that bad, and more needs to be done there, clearly, but for the rest, that remains. There are significant patterns that we see where technology utilization could be highly useful. With that, I'm going to end, and there have been a bunch of people here involved, and it's just not my work. Thank you.